everyone! Welcome to the Jayda and Stitches show. This is a very busy time of year. The October, November, December period of the calendar has a lot going on. You've got Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, New Year's, holiday parties, and of course there's still birthdays. All of that can add up to a lot of fun interaction, but it can also be kind of hard on the old pocketbook. If you're a crafter and you've already committed to the idea of making gifts this year, maybe this is something you do every year, maybe this is your first year, or maybe you want to up the number of gifts you make this year over past years, then you know that it can still cost money to get all the supplies that you need in order to satisfy that list of gifts you want to make. So, in order to save money this year, before you run out the door to the craft store, we are going to look at 7 different ways that you can shop your craft stash and save money. If you're a crocheter or a knitter and you've been doing it for a while, chances are you've been building up a pile of things. Odds and ends, lots of yarn. Even if you're new to it, you still might have little bits of yarn left over from other projects. So the first thing on our list of 7 ways to shop the stash is to start with the little bits. This is a bag of little bits. Some of these bits are very, very small. There's probably only 3 or 4 yards left in this little bit of yarn. What do you do with all those little bits? Well, you don't want to throw them out. I mean, we talk sometimes on the show about them being useful for stuffing. Maybe they're good for little hangers. You can just need a little length of yarn for, a little bit of embroidery on a little project like an amigurumi or something. That's why we keep that funny little bag of tiny little odds and ends of stash yarn. Well, you don't necessarily have to look at them in their individual pieces. You can knot a whole bunch of random colors of yarn together and make a magic ball. A magic ball ends up looking something like a pretty little cake when you're all done with it, and you can turn around and use that ball of yarn to make other fun little things. You also can use those small little bits of yarn to make small little projects. Sometimes we make little appliques or even tiny little ornaments for the tree here on the show that don't require a lot of yarn at all. In fact, this is a little granny hexagon Christmas stocking. That's made using scrap yarn. There's probably only around 5 yards of each color in that little thing. We've got little tiny things like a star. That's a granny star ornament. You can make up a whole bunch of those. You can use any weight of yarn, any kind of fiber. If it's an ornament, you don't have to worry about it washing well or not pilling, because these are the sorts of things that only get pulled out once or twice a year and they don't require a lot of maintenance. So you don't have to worry about it being cotton or wool or any kind of fiber blend. It can be anything you've got lying around. You can also make little things like baby booties or little stockings that are just decorative. Baby booties and small little things like that don't take up a lot of yarn. And you can stripe these things. So if you only have a yard of this, maybe 10 yards of another color, then you can do things like stripe a little hexagon granny stocking or maybe a little hat. I have 1 or 2 of those around here too. You can also make things like little gift tags. You can make gift tags using only a couple yards of yarn. You can color coordinate them to each individual family member so that you don't put their names on any gifts so that nobody actually knows what's under the tree for them until the big day. Number 2, the half balls of yarn. Maybe you've got a quarter of a skein, a half a skein. You just don't have the whole ball of yarn left over, but it's not so small that it goes into that little bag of odds and ends. Well, you can still do a lot with these half balls of yarn. You can combine 2 half balls of yarn and make a single skein project. So if a hat requires, say, 250 yards of yarn, and you've got about 150 yards left over from one ball and maybe 100 yards left over from another, you can make a striped hat as opposed to a solid colored hat. You can do the same thing with scarves or fingerless gloves. So now you're starting to make gifts that are a little bit bigger, a little more sizable, but you can combine colors together in order to make up for that lack of yardage that you needed maybe from a single ball of yarn. You can also do things like making baby blankets that are striped. You can make bags or pretty little purses for children that are striped or using blocks of color. So you can combine leftover large amounts of yarn that you've got together to make slightly larger projects and use up those half balls of yarn that tend to take up space on the couch or the shelf or wherever you may be hiding your yarn. Number 3, full balls of yarn. You've probably found these at the store at some point, thought they were pretty, didn't have a project in mind, bought it anyway, it's been sitting on the shelf. This is a good time to go pull those balls of yarn off the shelf. This is a full skein, so you haven't used it for anything. It's still got all of the yardage that it came with on the label, and this is where you can go looking for single ball projects. Hats, fingerless gloves, some skinnier sort of scarves or neck warmers often only use one ball of yarn. You can also take 1 or 2 or 3 full balls of yarn and combine them together to make larger projects like a throw blanket or a much larger baby blanket. The other thing you can do with a full ball of yarn is make an entire series of ornaments. So like our little miniature winter clothing Christmas tree ornament line, which is a little hat, and there's a sweater and a scarf and a pair of mittens, you can make an entire set, maybe 2 or 3, of all 4 of them that match out of a single ball of yarn. So this is a good time to pull out those single balls of yarn that you're not really sure what to do with and see if the color scheme fits the project that you might have in mind. Number 4, works in progress, also known as WIPs. You might have a pile of these lying around. Often at this time of year, you will find something that maybe you started this time last year and never got around to finishing, or maybe you started something in January thinking you would get a head start on the holidays. Go looking for anything that you may have started, put away, and forgotten about, because this is a great time of year to finish off those works in progress. You might be surprised by how much you've gotten done. The other thing you might do is find a work in progress that you started quite a long time ago. You maybe had someone in mind for it, maybe you didn't, you gave up on it, you got bored, maybe you found it too complicated. This is a good time to pull that project out and see if you can finish it, if it suits somebody on your gift list. Maybe you can finish it not in the way that it was fully intended, like if it was going to be a full king-size blanket, is it big enough for a throw? Is it big enough for a shawl or a wrap? Maybe it's just nice for a lapgan. You can also turn it into maybe a bag or a scarf. Maybe you can pull some yarn out and finish it as something. Look at those works in progress that you've had kicking around for a while and see about finishing them, because if there is already some work done, that kind of helps put you ahead, and maybe, just maybe, something in that pile of WIPs is going to be perfect for somebody on your list. Number 5, odds and ends. If you're a crafter, chances are that you've tried other crafts along the line, and you might have supplies left over from previous projects from other crafts. I'm talking about beads and buttons and sewing kits and maybe ribbon and cording and even polymer clay, other crafting materials. You might want to go source them out of your stash as well, because you'll be surprised at how often these things all play together rather nicely. For example, you might want to make some amigurumi, and you can use buttons or beads for eyes, or even little buttons or little accents on the amigurumi to kind of really bring them to life. You can also make a little tiny purse or a little bag, and you can decorate it with some ribbon, maybe a little cording, maybe you can add some buttons to it just to make it kind of pretty. There are lots of ways that you can use up the other stuff in your stash to sort of help accentuate the gifts that you're already going to be crocheting or knitting. A lot of us probably have a big pile of buttons. This is only one of my button containers. And in those button containers are often very pretty buttons left over from old clothes or previous projects, or maybe you bought a card of really pretty buttons and you used 4 and there's 1 more or 2 more left. Pull out those pretty buttons and give them a home on one of your projects this year. Number 6, the Make-A-Head Stash. If you've watched this channel for any time at all, you've probably heard me mention the Make-A-Head Stash. This is the basket, bag, suitcase, closet, shelving unit, whatever it might be, where you've made things and put them away because you didn't necessarily have somebody in mind for the project. You wanted to make something, and then you didn't know what else to do with it. So you put it away for a rainy day or a possible gift in the future. Check out your Make-A-Head stash. Maybe there are things that you've already made in that stash that would be perfect for somebody on your gift list. These could be little ornaments, small appliques that you could turn into things like keychains or other ornaments, or you could add to an existing project like a purse or a bag or a hat or anything like that. These also might be things like washcloths, dishcloths, little cozies, soap savers, little things that you may have made a whole bunch of, put away, and possibly forgotten about. You'd be surprised at what you can use from your Make-A-Head stash for your gift list, especially if you're just looking for little extra filler things, like the stuff you want to put on top of a gift, or just kind of spruce up an already existing gift. Maybe you've got a nice bar of soap and you want to pair a dishcloth or a washcloth with it. That's the kind of thing that you might find in your Make-A-Head stash. So don't forget to look at that before you go out and make a whole bunch of new things. Also, If you're busy crocheting while you're watching this little video and you're making things that you don't really know what else to do with, start your make-ahead stash. It's going to be a busy couple of months. You never know when you might dive into that stash and pull out the perfect thing for somebody at the last minute. And number 7. That pile of granny squares or other motifs. I don't usually consider piles of granny squares or granny rectangles or pretty little motifs that I've made as a work in progress. If they were earmarked for something like a blanket, then okay, that's technically a work in progress. But sometimes I just like to make things like granny rectangles or even granny hexagons or granny squares. They're a fun way to use up your existing yarn. See the little bits of yarn that we talked about at the beginning in number 1, the half balls that we talked about in the beginning at number 2, and also even the full skeins of yarn, number 3, that maybe you didn't know what else to do with and you were combining them together. Granny squares, in fact, any kind of little motif, is a great way to use up excess yarn. And I have a tendency to do that and then put them aside. There are so many things that you can do with granny squares or other existing motifs. Right away, you can make scarves, bags, little gift bags. Depending on how big the squares are, you might even make an entire blanket, a baby blanket, a lapgan. Consider that so much of that work has already been done. All it needs is a little bit of assembly. So definitely go looking to see if you've got a pile of granny squares. And then you can look up various granny square projects. Like I said, you can make a really nice scarf out of them, just stitch them together and then put on a little border, maybe some tassels. You can make a bag. We have a really cute granny square gift bag tutorial that only requires 2 granny squares that are the same size, but they can be any size, anything from the very small to the very big. And of course you can do other things too, like combine a whole bunch together to make a random blanket. You can make a larger bag by stitching more together in sets of 4. There's a lot you can do with a granny square. So if you have a pile of those, don't overlook the granny squares this year when you're thinking about other gifts to make for people on your list. And there you go. That is 7 ways to shop your stash to help make gifts, finish gifts that you may have already started, find gifts that you may have made and put away, and even create new, bigger projects from things like granny squares that you may have started, put away, and forgotten you even had. This all helps to save us money and still make really beautiful, unique, and sweet gifts for the holidays for all the people on our list. I hope you enjoyed today's video. We will see you soon here on the Jayda and Stitches Show. Until then, stay safe, stay crafty, shop that stash, and have a great week. Bye, everyone.
Hi, everybody. Mr. InStitches here. Thank you for watching today. Here are some of our other videos you might be interested in. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe.